Welcome to The Path is Always Evolving, a podcast for healing humans and curious souls. Hosted by energy healer Tenya Eichenberg and mind body specialist Eva Zobian-Wolf, this show blends science and spirit to explore real life healing, self care, and personal transformation. No fluff, no fixing, just grounded conversations that meet you where you are. Because healing isn't linear, but the path, it's always evolving. Hello and welcome back to The Path is Always Evolving. I'm Eva Zobian-Wolf. I am a nurse, yoga therapist, and energy healer. And I'm here today with my co-host, Tenya Eichenberg, who is also an energy healer and self-care coach. Today, we are going to be diving into the topic of generational wounds, the pain we inherit, and the healing that we choose.
Yes, the healing that we choose. I think that is the key phrase there, because oftentimes our generation is becoming we are the rule breakers.
Yes.
And we are breaking a lot of generational wounds. And so you and I have a lot of experience with this. I do believe that previous generations, each generation has raised their children a little bit differently than their parents raised them. But there are a lot of things that were passed down from generation to generation that our generation is like, no, we're putting the squash on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just to clarify, you and I are both Gen X.
Yes.
We've talked about this multiple times. I refer to us as the feral generation because we were pretty much the generation left on our own for long periods of time. But we were also not the generation to really look at the emotions that we were having, the emotions that we were feeling, and to have that be either validated or really expressed.
Yeah.
And that part of that is that generational energetic transference
Right.
where it's just not, you heard this, this isn't something that we talk about. This is not something that we do as a family. I don't know if you heard similar sayings in your family like that.
I can't say, like, I don't have a lot of memories from growing up. I don't have a lot of memories of our family talking about things. I, I, I do remember a lot of times my mom talking at us. Like, we would have family meetings, right? We would have family meetings, but I couldn't tell you what those family meetings were about. Most of the time, I think they were about how my mom was being treated. Was
Was
that
she feeling that she was a martyr?
So little backstory, my mom was diagnosed with being bipolar at 28. And she is my older siblings' stepmom. And she did adopt them when they were 4 and 5 years old because their mother passed away, unfortunately. Um, but so when she married my dad, she was 21. And she went into a marriage with two kids. Year later had me, and then 18 months later after that had my brother. So at 28 years old I think my oldest sister was 15 or 16. So it was like 15, 13, 8, and 6 or something like that when she was diagnosed with being bipolar. From that point on, things were chaotic. Life revolved around my mom. Life revolved around her feeling valued, her feeling appreciated, mostly by my dad. But I know now that her diagnosis had a lot to do with her perception of what things were. I can't say for sure what things were because what I remember is just chaos. I remember things getting better when my older siblings moved out, but my older siblings moved out when they were 14 and 17.
Ouch.
So, yeah. Yeah. And they never came back home after that. And there is some relationship there with my older sister, but it's not it's not the sibling. I don't have a relationship with my siblings that I would love to have. And that's something I'm still working through and coming to terms with. But so yeah, I don't remember if we had, I remember don't cry or we'll give you something to cry about. Um, Buck up, walk it off, those kinds of things. I can remember my mom, if we were upset, she would say, "Oh, well, when I was a kid, she would make it about her, right? It was, my dad did this or my mom did that, and I didn't feel this way and I didn't feel that way." I do remember those kinds of conversations, but again, it didn't feel like a teaching environment moment. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because I remember both my parents grew up in, Eastern Europe,
Mhm.
and having grown up post World War II, there was a lot of trauma. And just to kind of talk on that for just a moment, all of my work is in the nervous system, in the mind body connection. And the as a yoga therapist, I one of the tenets of my particular school of thought is that every single person has some level of trauma, right? And this is exactly what we're talking about, is how does this ancestral trauma that may have been our great grandparents, our great 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 grandparents, but even further back, that level of trauma left an imprint on the nervous systems of everybody in our ancestral lineage.
Yeah.
And we today are a product of all, there's little pieces there that were imprinted on everybody. And most influential, of course,
Mhm.
were the adults that we grew up with, the environments that we grew up in, and the nervous systems of the people that we were surrounded by. And so
Right.
if you had somebody that had a lot of dysregulation in their nervous system, they had a very imbalanced nervous system, that created an environment where we didn't always feel seen and heard or
Right.
even safe.
Yeah.
And that leaves an imprint on us. And then what we're talking about today is how do we take that information and focus on how do we heal that? And again, that's something that we can choose or we can not choose to do it. And so, my background, having two parents that were learning English, had moved to a country, moved to a new country, gotten married, had me, and were learning English and trying to assimilate into a very tiny little town in Michigan.
Hmm.
There was a lot of not feeling seen, not feeling heard, not feeling safe,
Yeah.
on their part. And,
Right.
and then that translated into the environment that they created.
Right.
And so there was a lot of, very similar to what you had, is anytime I tried to say, this is happening and this is hard for me. Oh, you don't know hard.
Right.
I grew up in, post World War II Czechoslovakia, and we had to do this and we had to do that, and
Mhm.
okay,
Yeah.
but my life is still hard right now because this is all
Yep.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah. And and that was, and I don't know if your parents still do that. My mom, so the last serious conversation I had with my mom, I think she finally got it. She finally understood, because I blatantly had to tell her, this is not about you. This is about me. Because she kept trying to turn the conversation back to her. And I know that we as humans do that so that we can show who we're talking to that we understand. Right?
It's a method of
It's
it.
a method of, right, right. And that's, and I believe that is what she was trying to do. But my inner child was like, no, mom, this is not about you. This is about me and what I've had to undo because of your traumas that I had to endure. And there was a lot of stuff that I had to work through on an energetic level. It's when I realized that my anxiety and depression had absolutely nothing. Well, I take that back. It wasn't absolutely nothing, but it started because of all the generational wounds that were passed down. That's where that was the root, the core of where my anxiety and depression was coming from, was energies that were passed down from both sides of the family. But ironically, it was mostly from my dad's side, from his dad. And, I've had energies that went back 20, 30 generations that I was holding on to. Now, I believe that they were passed down to me from generation to generation so that I could clear them so they didn't pass on to my kids.
Absolutely, absolutely. And those are the things that show up for us as silence, not talking about
Mm-hmm.
specific things, not talking about money, not talking about budgets, not talking about anger, not talking
Right.
about how to handle confrontations, how to handle conflict with people,
Mm-hmm.
how to handle death.
Oh my gosh.
That's
That's
a
I
big one that I encountered as an ICU nurse.
that is huge. Now I started have you ever heard of Death Cafe? This is a little bit off tangent, but have you ever heard of a Death Cafe?
No.
So I started going to this Death Cafe that is run by a death doula. And they
Oh,
have them all over the country. So
yes.
you can look up to see if there's a death cafe in your area. But it's not a place to go and talk about, it's not a grief session. It's not grief counseling. It is to go and talk about death, to become comfortable with the prospect of death. And what does that mean for different people? And like the last one we went to is like, what song do you want played at your funeral? And I've gotten to the point in my healing where I'm like, I don't care what my family does when I die. Whatever brings them closure, I want them to do. They want to cremate me and send me off the end of the pier with a Viking funeral, have at it. They want to bury me because they want a headstone to go and visit, have at it. My soul is not taking this meat suit with me. So do whatever you want. But it's gotten me more comfortable with talking about death. I've only been to two, but already I'm more comfortable talking about the fact that I am going to die one day. My kids are going to die one day. They may die before me, which is a horrible thought, but they might. And how would I can't prepare for that, but that's something that I I can come to terms with. That death comes for everybody.
Right. And that's the thing, is that when we have an attachment to, and I've seen this play out in so many different ways, where 80 something year old grandma, grandpa, 90 something year old grandma, grandpa comes into the hospital, and everybody is just, it's like it came out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there looking at everybody thinking, out of the blue?
Yeah.
You know, and again, you know, if you've never had these conversations, if you've never talked about this, then yeah, it can feel like it's completely out of the blue, because we all had the idea that grandma and grandpa was going to live forever. They were
Right.
never going to leave us, because we're all so attached to them being here and being alive,
Yeah.
and not recognizing that this is a natural part of life. And you know, the flip side of that is also, they may have had such a profound relationship that that is just such a, you know, such a deep connection with the person, that the idea of that person not being there is incredibly difficult to feel
Yeah.
that separation. And you know, full disclosure, I have never had that relationship with a grandparent or even with a parent.
I haven't either. I have not lost anybody so close to me that I have had to feel the deep grief of losing someone. So I can't speak to that.
And my father did pass away. However, I did not have a good relationship with my dad.
Yeah.
Because there was this, again, there was this generational trauma that we just could never get to that point of being able to actually fully see each other.
Right.
And,
Right.
and I'm not in that space with my mother.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not in that space with either of my parents, and unfortunately none of my siblings. I am in that space with my husband and with my kids and with my best friends and with some other friends in my circle.
Exactly. Yeah.
My
It's the
chosen
family we
family.
choose.
My chosen family, yeah. Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that there's a lot of us in the Gen X circle that have established the family that we choose, because these generational traumas have developed some of us into what we refer to as the black sheep of the family,
Yeah.
because we
Yeah.
are the ones that have said, this ends with me. I am not carrying this forward. I am going to do the work to heal this, because
Yeah.
these patterns of not talking about death, not talking about finances, not talking about menopause is
Yeah.
one of these topics that
Yeah.
I was in a conversation with my best friend and my mothering sister, and then each of their female children.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in a conversation, and we started talking about, because three of us are in menopause, and the symptoms that we were having, and the way that it's been talked to us about menopause, and then
Mm-hmm.
treatment of menopause, has been so sporadic. And the information, the scientific research that's out there was actually wrong for so
Yeah.
long. That this research that was conducted
I know.
horribly.
Yep.
Women haven't been included in research
Right. Isn't that
for a long
crazy?
portion. Yeah, I mean, just saying these things out loud, it's
Yeah.
just absolutely ridiculous. So now that we have looked at the data and looked at it through the lens of, hey, the mean age in that study was 63, and that's actually, you know, too
Out
far
of
into
menopause.
menopause to be able to
Right.
be able to say that this is accurate and statistically significant.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it from that lens, you know, we started having these conversations, and every single one of the daughters jumped in and said, this has never been talked about before.
Yeah.
And we as a generation have collectively decided that we are done with this. We
We
are
are.
talking about the taboo subjects of sex, religion, abortion,
Yep.
politics, menopause. Women have periods, and, things like this happen.
Yeah.
We die, and we need to talk about it
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
because we don't heal this. We don't get to move forward as the best
right.
version of ourselves.
Right. So I want to go over a list of, I just pulled these up on Google. And so a list of generational traumas and where they can come from. So you talked about war and conflict, right? Because that was where your parents came from. We have systemic oppression, natural disasters and pandemics. Like think about the depression era, and what that passed on to future generations, like poverty and economic hardship. Like how many generations back like I live near Washington D.C. and Washington D.C. has a very high poverty rate. And you can go into I think it's Southeast DC, and you can probably go back 5 or 6 generations of the same family living in poverty, because that was a generational wound that was passed down, telling generation after generation that you can't get out of the hood.
We were just talking about this previously. The book that I'm reading currently is my grandmother's hands, and this was recommended to me by a student. And it's talking about racialized trauma and how white bodies brought over their own trauma from
Mhm.
wherever their original ancestral land was, and then the trauma that was inflicted on people of color
Right,
in
right,
many different ways, and how we interact with each other without having healed that trauma. There are certain ways that our bodies will respond when we see particular triggers,
right.
which we don't even recognize. We don't even know that it's happening
Yeah.
until we start doing work.
Right. And so this also shows that generational trauma is not just blood to blood.
Yes.
It's generation to generation. It is the silent generation to is it boomers after that? Let me make sure I got my generations right, because I want to so yeah, so the silent generation to the baby boomers, from the baby boomers to Gen X, from Gen X to millennials, millennials to Gen Z, and Gen Z to Gen Alpha. It is it is that 10-year gap, right? That is saying we're going to pass this on to you.
Mm-hmm.
It is coming from teachers. It is coming from if you go back to it's the greatest generation, the people born between 1901 and 1927, right? You go back to that generation, they've got generational wounds of slavery that is passed on to them, either from this is how you treat people, like this is how you get what you want,
Yeah.
to I can't even fathom, like just kids walking by and picking up those things and then going, oh, well, if that's how I get what I want, well, then I'm going to teach my own kids how to get what they want.
Right. And this is how we get bullies and how
Right.
we get,
Right.
you know, and going back to what we talked about in a previous episode, that the energy of our words,
Yeah.
this is how we develop these patterns of the way that we speak, and in our it's reflecting our own internal traumas.
Right. Yeah. So generational does not mean parental.
Mm-mm.
It doesn't mean ancestral. A lot of times it does. When you and I are doing energy work with clients, we will often find those generational wounds coming up as through the bloodline. But that's not the only place they come from. In fact, I'm sure if we dug deeper into those questions, we would find that those wounds were created from a combination of different sources.
Absolutely. And the thing is that one important thing to recognize is we have to, we don't have to, we can choose to, if you choose to do the healing, this needs to come at it through the lens of the mind body connection. We
Right.
can't just focus on what we're thinking, what we're doing. It
Right.
also has to include that we have to embody it. There has to be some type of somatic practice involved as well too,
Yeah. Yeah.
to be able to really heal that.
Can you explain to our listeners what that somatic process might look like?
Okay, so that just involves being aware of where in your body you feel tension, tightness, stress. A lot of times we think, oh, I feel stress and I carry it here in my shoulders, or I feel stress and I carry it here in my hips. And that is true. It is stress. What we're saying and what we're highlighting is that that stress isn't just having to deal with your mother-in-law, having to
Right.
deal with your boss, having to deal with current politics or
Right.
whatever it is that's in your immediate life right now,
Right.
that there's a component of what was given to you that you didn't ask for, and it's
Hmm.
settled into your body and it shows up as tightness. So, movement practices like walking, hiking, being out in nature, yoga, Tai Chi, really anything that you do, but it needs to be on a little bit slower, more intentional
Hmm.
portion of it.
Right.
And then just being mindful. So when something you notice an area that's tight, adding breath into it and just breathing in and breathing out as you move, and then noticing where you feel a little bit lighter. Massage therapy is really good for this. Lymphatic massage is really good for this.
Yeah.
And also the introspection and the reflection, doing things like journaling, speaking with a counselor, speaking with a clergy member, having a support group, going to places like death cafes,
Yeah.
where you start to look at the world as a bigger component and you are a part of that bigger component, whether that's a church, whether it's the universe, whether it's a coven, it doesn't matter
Hmm.
what the group is, but recognizing that I am a piece of all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned massage, and that's one of my favorites. Although whenever I need the massage, like no one's ever available to for an appointment, so I always have to enlist my husband, and I actually got my own massage table because I
Ooh.
always have to enlist him to work out a knot. And last night I needed him to work on my shoulder blade again because that is where I hold a lot of my tension is in my right shoulder blade. And I had him working on this knot, and all of a sudden I went into an ugly cry. And he started to stop and like bent down to hold me. I'm like, no, please just keep working on that knot. This is emotional energy that I have been trying to get out, that I have been trying to work through for a while. And so I need you to just keep working on that knot. And typically after he's worked on that knot, the next day my shoulder blade is incredibly tender, like it's a bruise. It feels like a bruise. I woke up this morning and it doesn't feel like a bruise. I don't feel the tension there that I felt before. And I know now because of what came up during my weekend away about disconnection and communication and just feeling like I was disconnected from deeper conversations. That is where that was coming from. Because I tell you what, it really hurt like 2 days while I was on vacation. And again, the hotel didn't have any any appointments available for a massage. Um,
Remind me, I'm
but
going to have to introduce you to a tool that I use that is fantastic for that.
is it well, I have the percussion, the massage gun, and I use a butter knife and I do Graston on my muscles on occasion with a butter knife, which is, I'm
Oh,
sure always appropriate.
okay. So there's something called yoga tune-up balls, and these they're little rubber balls, much gentler than a lacrosse ball, and they're grippy, unlike a tennis ball. So they've
Hmm.
got the great texture between the two. And it works specifically on fascia. And
Okay.
this is the medium-sized one. I usually have two of the smaller ones. And with my scoliosis, I get a lot of imbalance in my muscles. But what this does is it helps to, cross, you can twist, you can shear. And again, this relates to the topic that we're talking about because our fascia is actually an energetic scaffolding in our body
Hmm.
that retains the energetic component that we are talking about.
Yeah.
And so when you release that emotion, it frees up that energetic scaffolding so that energy flows.
Yep.
The energy is able to move in your body. And then physiologically, you also have less of the fibers sticking and stuck together. So you have more circulation through the arteries and veins, you have better transmission through the nerves, and you have increased lymphatic drainage.
Yep.
So this is, again, this is that whole tying everything together. This is why you may have certain illnesses that run in a family because you also have certain generational traits
Right.
of holding energy in a particular area that leads to a physical change in that particular area of the body that can eventually lead to illness, some type of chronic condition,
Right.
because it is structurally constricting flow of blood, nerves, lymph in that particular area. And so there's a lot of things that are tied to the nervous system, tied to the state of the nervous system that equals inflammation in the body that eventually leads to some type of illness. And what we're finding out in the medical world is that a good percentage of chronic illness is due specifically to stress in the body. And when I say
Oh
stress in
yeah.
the body, it's not, again, it's not a I can't pay my bills. That is a stress, but it's this, what is the way that we process information? What's the way that we process emotions? And what's the
Yeah.
energy?
Yep.
Again, that vibrational component.
Yep.
What's the energy that we live at?
Yep. Yeah. It's the stress that is affecting the energetic, the physical, the mental, the spiritual, and the emotional bodies. It's affecting everything. And it comes from so many different places, right? It comes from the food that we eat. It comes from the emotional imbalances that we have, whether we're emotionally intelligent or not. Even if we're emotionally intelligent, it doesn't mean that we don't have those things going on, because at some point we were not emotionally intelligent. You have to learn to be emotionally intelligent, and that comes from maturing and growing. And if your parents didn't know how to teach you how to be emotional emotionally intelligent, then chances are you're not teaching your kids either. Now, we've learned to become emotionally intelligent, and we are passing those things on to our kids. And of course, if it's within their journey to have that emotional intelligence, they will have it. If not, they may be on their own journey. But there are a lot of things that we can do to um, eliminate, reduce, get rid of those generational wounds. And it comes from both the subconscious and the conscious mind. So what are some tips that you have? And I'll share what I have if they're different, but what do you have that can help the listeners to get rid of those generational wounds once they know what they have, what wounds they may have?
And the thing is the first step is just recognizing I'm carrying some stuff that I know is not me.
Right.
One of the practices that I have been doing lately is going back and reading the Yoga Sutras, which is the text, the step-by-step process of how to live a yogic life.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, one of the things that has come up, I've been going through one sutra a day, and I just started this in the last week. And each time I go through each of the sutras, it's reminding me to pay attention that this is a big nervous system trigger for me. This is a huge nervous system trigger for me.
We might just get through 2 episodes today.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. We'll see if they stop here soon. Okay, so going through the Yoga Sutras, one of the things that has come up for me, one was the sutra that talked about you are your authentic self. And this really ties into what we're talking about today, because the thing is, you are always your divine self, your authentic self, your true self. That version of you always exists. It has never stopped existing. It's always there. But what has happened is there's been a lot of crap that has been piled up on top of that version of you. And what we do when we start to look at what makes us happy, what is our purpose, what is our passion, what are the things that light us up, we start to peel away those things. And generational trauma is going to show up as, the times where everybody said, make sure you smile because that's when you look pretty.
Right.
And girls aren't supposed to be muscular, and you start to peel away all of those things that people have said, whether it
Mm-hmm.
was a teacher, a parent, and whoever it was. But the things that like when we grow up, you were supposed, in order to be pretty, you had to be incredibly thin and tan,
Right.
right? And so all of those things, we're packing those, unpacking them, pulling them off, and saying, okay, that was crap, I'm not listening to that anymore. And as you do that, you start to uncover what that true, authentic version of you is. And the more you go through this process, the more you uncover that version. So
Mm-hmm.
it's things like journaling, exercising. And when I say exercise, because that involves that movement component. So
Right.
when you're exercising and you're doing it in a way where you're paying attention. I feel good when I do this. I feel
Yeah.
like crap when I do this. So I'm going to do more of this that makes me feel good. I'm going to eat these foods because I feel more energized. I'm going to get a full night's sleep because I feel energized.
Mm-hmm.
And then spending time in some type of personal growth, personal
Mm-hmm.
development, whether
Right.
it's reading self-help books, whether it's, reading whatever religious text, whether it's journaling, listening to podcasts like ours,
Right.
where, and then paying attention. meditating. And when you meditate, it's not necessarily I got to empty my mind. Instead, it's okay, this thought just popped up into my head. Why
Why?
do I have this thought?
Yeah.
And is it something that's my thought, or is it something that it's somebody else's thought? And how do I feel about this?
Yeah.
How do I know, how do I feel in my body when I think this?
Yeah. 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 And that's where journaling comes in really handy, is when you're asking yourself those why questions, right?
Why do I
So
do these things?
yeah. Other ways to help clear it is energy work. Other things that you can use to get to the root of those generational wounds, whether you want to find out what the wound is or what is anchoring that wound in. That, that's the other thing is sometimes it's anchored in, but we don't know why it's still there. We
So,
fight it, we rebel against it, but sometimes it surfaces and sometimes it can take over. And I went through that for a long, like there were things that I feel like I did to my kids growing up that, like, I tried spanking my kids for a little while and I didn't like it. So I stopped. But there were things that like I would bring in and go, oh, well, this worked for me. And then I would do it and I'm like, oh my God, I don't like doing that.
oh
And
yeah.
and and that was how I worked through generational wounds before I got on my realized healing journey. But energy work was a huge part of that because I had emotions and I had trauma energies that were passed down for generations from both sides of my family that were there energetically. I didn't even know they were there, but they were there.
And this is one of those things that you can also tap into whoever your guides are.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be that your guides are some of your ancestors, and you can sit down and be in stillness and just simply ask your ancestors to come in and help you.
Yeah.
What is something that I need to work on? What is something that I need to do? How can I heal the pain that you felt that got passed down to me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
And
one
and by doing that, we start to heal the future generations.
So my yoga mentor, it's kind of funny because she has called in her ancestors. She has never been, up until recently, she's never been a person that felt comfortable in the kitchen. And she would go in and she would make something, but it was usually one or two different dishes. But she decided to lean into the ancestors and say, okay, help me get more comfortable cooking in the kitchen. And so she would call in the ancestors and say, okay, I'm going to make something along the lines here. What should I add into it? What should I do with this? What should I do with that? And she just asked the ancestors, help me to be a better cook.
Yeah.
And it was something that, because again, that was a generational trauma for her,
Mm-hmm.
was
Not being in the kitchen.
not being in the kitchen.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways to do this. Make it and mold it into the way that makes sense for you. If there's something that you feel stuck and challenged with,
Yeah.
ask, why
Yeah.
am I stuck here?
Yeah. That is the biggest thing, is ask those questions. Ask them out loud. If you need to wait until you're alone in the house or you're alone on a walk, then carve out time. But ask
And
those questions
listen.
why, and listen. And when you listen, it's gonna come in your voice. It's gonna be your voice. So don't say, "Oh, I'm just making this up." It's gonna be your voice. It's your intuition. I always tell my clients, unless it is telling you to hurt yourself or hurt somebody else, it's okay to listen to. If it's telling you to hurt yourself or hurt somebody else, it's not you. And that's a whole nother conversation. But that's how you build your intuition. It's how you build trust with yourself. It's how you build trust with your ancestors and your guides, is by listening to what's going on.
It's also the way that we build safety in our nervous system. When our nervous system tells us yes to this and no to something else, and we listen,
Right.
that builds that bridge of healing, because now we're trusting in our intuition,
Mhm.
and we're teaching our nervous system that we will listen when it
Yeah.
says this is good for you, this is not good for you.
Right. And that also builds your self-worth, your self-love, and your self-respect. So thank you everybody for coming on and listening to, this is our 7th episode, Generational Wounds. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. Also go over to the Metamorphosis Project podcast and make sure you subscribe there. And we both also have groups that you can join. So I'll put those down into the show notes as well, along with our websites and all of our social handles. So thank you so much for coming on, and we will see you guys next week when we talk about, why am I still trying to prove that I'm a good child? And this is coming, so this is going to be a great episode on adult children, which is going to be more our generation, and why are we still trying to prove to our parents, our baby boomer parents, why we are still such good children and where that comes from.